All right, this is the lubrication and maintenance for your KME 101-foot tractor drawn aerial. First thing we're going to do is go over the lubrication points for grease fittings. The first ones we have are down on the tiller tractor bearing. So the first ones are the fifth wheel pivot pins, and the second ones on each side of the vehicle are the rotation bearing down here at the bottom between the switches. Those are on both sides of the vehicle. You need to make sure you hit both of those. Up here on the top, the lift cylinders, grease fittings at both ends of the grease or of the cylinder, and you need to hit those. One thing on those when you do them is make sure you're lifting the ladder up maybe 20 degrees, greasing them, another 20 degrees, grease them as you go up so you can make sure you get it all the way around the pin. It's kind of important because otherwise the grease is going to sit in one spot on the pin. From there we can move up to the top of the vehicle here. The other spots we have are the grease fittings at the pivot points. They're on the inside here, labeled at the waterway hinge point here. And the other ones we have are down here on the rotation bearing. So you can see them down here at the bottom. They're actually in 4 spots on the aerial. If you have the aerial elevated completely, then you'll be able to see all 4 of them. And the idea there is that we grease them in at least 2 rotations so we can get grease all the way around the bearing. We don't want to just put grease in one spot. We want to grease it, move it a 1/4 of a turn, grease it, and go all the way around. Go to another point and do the same thing and do a whole nother rotation. That'll get grease all the way around those fittings. The only other grease points we have are on the waterway. And on the waterway, when you have it extended out, they're at each telescopic section, and you can just add grease to those, the same grease that you're using on the other components. So that's the grease gun scenario for the aerial ladder. And the next thing we'll show you is the cables and how to inspect them for tightness and adjustment. So what we're going to do now is show you how to inspect cable adjustment, and the best way to do that is put the aerial at 60 degrees, which we've done already, extend the ladder all the way out, and then we're going to run it all the way up and all the way down numerous times. And what we're going to watch for is we're going to watch for the cables to see if they're rubbing against anything, see if they look extremely loose, and watch the sections to see if they pull to one side or the other. And that's kind of the big deal there, is making sure that the adjustment's proper on both sides and the ladder's going straight up and down. So we'll go ahead and do that now, and kind of just watch the cables as they go down. What you will see is that I retract. The retract cables will get tight, and that's what I'm looking for there. And as I extend, the retract cables will get loose and the extension cables will get tight. So I'm just trying to make sure as it comes down, those cables you can see on the sides aren't bouncing around and hitting the rung or the sides of the ladder, and they're not drooping down and hitting the ladder in any way, which they look pretty good at this point. So that's all the way down pretty much. And then we're going to go up and check the extensions, and we'll do this a couple of times. If you look over here on the side, you can see the retraction cable's pretty loose now, but that's going to be the case when you extend. It's always the opposite. When you extend, the retraction cables are loose, and you retract, the extension cables are loose. So and the other thing I'm watching for is to make sure those sections kind of go out straight. I don't want them pulling to one side or the other, which they look pretty good. Let's do that again. And one more time up. So I'm going to kind of stop it right there. If you look, I'd say the cables right now as it sits are a little bit on the loose side. They certainly aren't way out of spec or anything, but as you can see, if you look on the sides, those cables are drooping slightly, and you can see as the retraction cables come down, they're a little bit on the loose side. This ladder is fairly new. For the first 30 to 60 days of a ladder operation, these cables are going to stretch slightly. So you're going to see these cables get a little bit loose as we go along, and within that, after that time frame, the cables are going to have to be adjusted at some point to tighten them up. So let's finish the extension.
How do we know when they're
Hitting things. I'm going to start hitting stuff. So the way you know that the ladders are not adjusted proper, or the cables are not adjusted properly, is as we're extending and going up and down, the cables will be bumping into the sides of the ladder or bumping into the rungs as they go up and down, depending on where the cable is. So you can watch them whether they're on the bottom or on the sides. If they're hitting something, that's your indication there's a problem. The other thing is if the ladder, one section or the other is pulling to one side or the other, then one cable is out of adjustment or not, and that needs to be addressed as well. So that's kind of the easy way for an operator from a daily or weekly standpoint to check cable operation. Because once they start touching stuff, then you know they're out of adjustment. So the other thing we want to go over here a little bit is ladder lubrication. So this ladder, as it sits now, is a little on the dry side, not quite lubed up to spec. And so when I go, I'll finish extension here. When I go to pull it back, you'll see the ladder kind of jumping and surging. And what that is just not lubricated enough. The ladder's gripping and the cables are pulling each time to try to pull it back. In reality, the ladder should come down almost all by itself by weight. But because it's not lubed up right, it's kind of sticking in places, it's going to want to kind of surge. So we'll do that now, and you'll be able to hear it and see it in the ladder. You can see how it kind of jumps as it comes down. That's the first indicator that you're a little bit dry and you need to get it lubricated. Typically, if you're doing the weekly or 10-hour lubrication, you're not going to have this problem. This is a big problem, really more related to dirt than it is to how much lube is on the ladder, because dirt starts picking up the lubrication, balling it up, and stripping it off the ladder sides. Now as the ladder gets closer to the bottom and it's easier for it to move, it's not quite as prevalent. So if we stop here and look at the sides, that's the other thing you can look at as far as it being dry. You can see there's almost shiny spots in where the grease is, and that's a pretty good indicator that the grease is kind of worn off and there really isn't enough on the ladder. That's not something you want to do. It's even more dramatic when you look on the bottom of the ladder, because all the weight of the ladder is pushed on those bottom pads and it's really easy for the grease to strip off. So the shivs on this ladder do not require greasing. They're a greaseless setup with a oil lubricated bushing with bronze thrust washers and stainless shafts. But if you get a case where the pulleys start to squeak for whatever reason, get a little dust in them or something, it's okay to shoot either some WD-40 or white lithium down on the shaft and then run it in and out, and it'll prevent that from happening. But it doesn't require. But again, if it's squeaking, it can be a bit of an annoyance, and that'll help alleviate that problem.
Where at?
Just on the shaft, either up here or where on the bronze washers. It'll be much easier to see when the ladder's when you have the ladder stretched out. So I want to talk a few minutes about lubing the ladder. We talked a little bit about how this ladder was a little bit dry, and here's a spot we talked about underneath. It's a little easier to see. Here's a dry spot on the ladder. There's actually no lubrication whatsoever on it. The ladder's just kind of pulled it off, and it's really kind of a function of dirt. So that's gotten dirt on it, and the dirt is actually the thing that pulls the lubrication off the ladder. So keeping it clean and lubricating it within the weekly or 10-hour time frame will prevent that kind of thing from happening. To lubricate the ladder, you want to stretch it all the way out. You want to clean it off, so clean this dirty lubrication and dirt off the ladder, and then put it back on. I like to use like a tub with gloved hand. You can also use a brush. Try to stay away from the spray type lubricants. They don't seem to stick as well or stay, but it's all the way out extension. Also the cables, you can see right next to those here, you want to keep those clean as well. That'll help the life of the cable, keep the stretch down. And so what we want to do with those is just like the ladder slide or sections, we want to clean those off and lubricate them with a wire rope lubricant. When you actually lubricate those, You can either do it by wiping the cables on or operating the ladder and doing it at the pulleys or shivs. That'll just help keep them from stretching out. You won't have to adjust them as much, and it'll just be better for the life of the ladder.